Ministers, Excellencies, dear colleagues, it's my great pleasure to open today our discussion, a discussion on refugee children's education, on their inclusion in national education systems, and on the corresponding needs for enhanced responsibility sharing. As the High Commissioner underlined this morning, the number of refugees is rapidly increasing, while financial support has largely plateaued. Across the world, refugee situations are increasingly protracted, which makes it even more critical to provide education to refugee children while they are in exile. And yet, of the almost 15.5 million refugee children worldwide, more than half are not in school, with girls, children with disabilities, and other vulnerable groups falling even further behind. Now, for refugee children, education is their best chance to a better life. For their countries of origin, education is a chance to shape the generation that will be called upon to rebuild and bring stability. And for hosting countries, refugees' education is an investment to allow them to contribute, to prevent their marginalization, and to strengthen their prospects for an eventual return. Experience has shown that the most sustainable way to provide education in protracted situations, both financially and socially, is to do so through systems that are part of the national education system. And at the same time, to invest in these national education systems to increase both access and quality for all learners, refugees and nationals. Where full inclusion is not yet possible, transitional approaches may be needed that rely on parallel systems. Yet experience suggests that such systems should be developed with a focus on sustainability, and only as a second best option when inclusion is not deemed feasible or appropriate. At the 2019 Global Refugee Forum, several refugee hosting countries pledged to include refugee children in their national education systems. Since then, we have seen progress in many settings and important policy shifts. These countries' generosity should be underlined and commended. Yet, there's a cost to this, and responsibility sharing is needed, for the education of those children is indeed a global public good. Together with UNHCR and a number of member states, the World Bank has calculated the cost of providing education to refugee children through national education systems. These amounts are not beyond what could be financed with an effective deployment of existing resources. This is why we are here today, to pledge our support to achieving the SDG 4 national targets for early childhood education, primary education, and secondary education for both refugees and host communities, and with a focus on gender equality, and to find practical ways to deliver. Within the context of this pledge, some host governments are expected to make policy-related pledges, whether policy reforms or their implementation, that will facilitate refugee children's inclusion in national education systems. Some donors and other partners are expected to pledge financial support that is provided with a multi-year perspective to help cover some of the additional costs related to the inclusion of refugee children and/or to the strengthening of national systems. Some are also expected to pledge that temporary programs are designed and implemented in a way that facilitates an eventual transition to national education systems, if appropriate. The World Bank stands ready to play its role. Within the context of the broader pledge that was announced in the plenary, we expect to provide significant support to the inclusion of refugee children in national education systems in the years to come, based on government's demand. In particular, we are exploring the setting up of a dedicated instrument that would provide predictable multi-year financing to cover the additional costs of refugee children's inclusion in national systems in low-income refugee hosting countries. I look forward to today's panel discussion, in which we will hear about countries' experiences to date and about their pledges for the coming period. And I can't wait to work together with all of us in accelerating the implementation of these pledges. Many thanks, and let me give the floor to Felix.
Let's imagine a world where the ink to inclusive education writes the destiny of every child, regardless of our journeys. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests, thank you for the opportunity to speak to this important theme. I am a member of the Refugee Education Council, which is funded by the Government of Canada, proudly hosted by World Vision Canada, with the support of the Canadian International Education Policy Working Group, providing strategic support in global education advice. Today, my words echoes the collective call for action, a call to weave the narrative of sustainable futures through the tapestry of inclusive education for all, particularly for refugee children. Let's journey together through the experiences of young minds, not only mine, but those of countless others, navigating the turbulent seas of displacement, surmounting barriers, and triumphing over the shadows of trauma, all for the pursuit of education. We find ourselves at a crossroads where the right to education meets the imperative of inclusion, and the transition from learning to employment becomes a crucial bridge to secure sustainable futures. In the intricate fabric of refugee experiences, there exists a subtle yet profound reality, one where refugees often find themselves at a disadvantage when seeking access to opportunities, especially refugees navigating marginalized identities, such as girls and women, youth with disabilities, and LGBTQI+ youth. This disadvantage becomes particularly apparent when we examine the costs associated with participation or inclusion, or the costs that often exceed what an individual, especially a refugee, can afford. Consider, for instance, the aspiration of a refugee to engage in an internship or volunteer work. The financial barriers loom large, encompassing the cost of living, means of commuting to work, and sustenance. This becomes especially challenging for individuals residing in remote areas, far from potential job locations, and where opportunities are limited. Refugees often find it impossible to apply their acquired skills due to the limited opportunities, a predicament that even affects host nationals. Picture a refugee possessing healthcare skills like myself in a developing country where the avenues to practice our expertise are notably scarce. I experienced this personally after a year of fellowship and a subsequent year of consultancy role with UNFPA Ghana. The experience reinforced the potential and capability that refugees bring to the table. However, when I sought to transition to the fixed-term role within the organization, my legal status as a refugee became a barrier. This experience illustrates one of the many compounding challenges faced not just by me, but many others striving to be included. The surge of displacement presents a stark reality, one where education and job opportunities struggle to keep pace with the changing needs of a growing refugee population. For refugee children, education is not just a conduit for knowledge, it is a lifeline. When the solution to refugee predicament lacks a holistic approach, it might solve one problem while simultaneously exacerbating another. The challenges faced by refugees go beyond just education or employment. They encapsulate the intricacies of true inclusion, a notion that only flourishes in a world where peace reigns, borders dissolve, and solidarity is not just a concept, but a moral imperative. So let's talk about the cost of education. School fees, textbooks, transportation, uniforms, school meals, digital learning and accessibility tools, teacher training and mental health support. There are the cost of investment from global leaders, multilateral organizations, and civil society, many of whom are present in this very room. And then there are the other costs, the cost we will pay if we don't invest in education. Before the costs were calculated and labels were affixed, refugees were and are human beings. Our circumstances, while shaping our journey, should not define our inherent humanity. Inclusion must be more than just a policy. It must be a collective call, a collective pursuit of a more equitable, compassionate, and sustainable world. Thank you.
Your Excellencies, Ministers, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. My name is Belan Shimirimana, a refugee student here in Bangor University, United Kingdom, co-sponsored by Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, Scholarship Commission, and Window Trust International, EDAFI alumni, and a member of Tertiary Refugee Student Network. I'm delighted to moderate this session. The opening remarks by Mr. Xavier De Victor and Felix Sese spoke to the need for all stakeholders to be involved and play their roles to realize the promise of the Global Compact on Refugees by including refugee children in national education system. Jordan has been generously hosting refugees for many years and is currently hosting the world's second highest number of refugees per capita. Your Excellency, Professor Azmi Mahfouz, Minister of Education and Higher Education and Scientific Research in Jordan. Jordan has included refugees into your education system. What do you see as the benefits to this approach, and what are the key considerations for government and other partners, including refugees into the national system? Over to you, Your Excellency.
Thank you, Bella. As you mentioned, Jordan has the second highest refugee per capita number in the world. And as His Majesty King Abdullah II said this morning, we have almost 4 million refugees, which represent almost 40% of the total population of the country. And Jordan has been hosting refugees from different nationalities for a very long period of time, more than 75 years. Today, our education system hosts 2.27 million children in schools and 380,000 students in universities. Out of those, 1.58 are in public schools. And among students in schools, we have 163,000 Syrian refugee students and 94,000 other students from other nationalities, making them about 250,000 students, representing more than 12% of our total student population. The fundamental right to quality education, as established in Article 26 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, is recognized and guaranteed by the government of Jordan through its constitution. And strong national commitments have been made to maintain the right to education grounded in 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, in particular SDG 4. Moreover, in the newly launched Economic Modernization Vision 2023-2033 under the auspice of His Majesty King Abdullah II, education from early childhood to higher education is a key pillar. Jordan is committed to provide quality education for all children on its territory, despite the very heavy burdens on its education system. Syrian refugees enrollment in school is facilitated without documents or waiting for documents, and they are exempted from donation fees and school book fees, and they benefit from the out of school, the catch-up, the remedial, and adult literacy programs. To answer your particular question, education empowers refugees and enable them to play active roles in their societies and in their communities, especially when they return to their countries, and which will help them to rebuild these countries. It is in the best interest of any country to avoid having communities with low literacy rates, as decreased levels of education in any community can be a potential social and security threat on the long run for that community and for the hosting countries as well at large. Education can reshape the lives of refugees and allow them to reach their full potential, which will also contribute to host countries on the long run. Educated refugees could present an economic opportunity to the hosting communities and countries. However, it is important to keep in mind that including refugees into national education systems is not easy on hosting countries, as most refugees are concentrated in countries already suffering with their own economic and financial burdens. This is where the role of the international community becomes essential. Supporting national education systems help hosting countries to focus on education policy, quality, and school context, in addition to addressing pre-existing challenges. While we thank the international community for the continuous support, we urge all partners to fulfill their current pledges and to make new pledges and contributions, which should include multi-year financial policy and technical support for the Jordanian educational system, including TVET and higher education. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, and thank you for the government of Jordan for that generous heart in hosting refugees. We all know that the UK, United Kingdom, has long supported refugee protection, but 2023 is the first time it has made a dedicated global refugee commitment to refugees education outside its humanitarian portfolio. Minister Andrew Michel from the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office in United Kingdom, why a focus on support for inclusion in national system and multi-year financing now? Over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Bella, and good afternoon to everyone. Let me start not with my own words, but with those of Hala Kankan, a refugee advisor who is here today. Hala fled Syria with her family when she was 17, and like many refugees, the price for her safety was the loss of everything that she owned. And as she put it, the only thing they could not take from me was my education. And despite all the obstacles in her way, she went on to university in Turkey, studied in Finland on the Erasmus scheme, and also has just started studying in the UK at Reading University through a prestigious Chevening scholarship. Hala, I know you have since supported other Syrian refugees to continue their own schooling, and I want, on behalf of everyone here, to congratulate you on all you have achieved. I'm so glad you're with us here today. Now, your story shows once again how education transforms lives in sending young refugees to school. We open the door for further learning, better jobs, and safer futures. And we also know that for those who are in a refugee camp, a awful, difficult experience, the one opportunity the international community has to help is to ensure you do have a good education, because you are literally a captive audience. And also through modern technology, you can now, so long as you can get connected, you can get the best maths lesson in the world from whoever is the best maths teacher, wherever he or she are. And I think that really matters, because giving opportunities, they deserve to reach their full potential and support whole communities to grow and prosper. Supporting refugee education is a central commitment in the British government's new International Development White Paper, which has been widely welcomed. Some 50 countries contributed to it, more than 500 individual organizations. And I hope people here will have a chance to have a look at it. It is online on the Foreign Office website. We believe that all children who've been forced to flee their home countries should get 12 years of safe, quality education. And this is particularly vital for the most marginal children and those with disability. And that is why Britain is proud to co-sponsor the Education Mega Pledge launched here today. And I'm delighted to announce that as part of this, Britain will provide £4 million to support partners working on refugee education. And this pledge, we hope, will galvanise international action, helping more young refugees to reap the lifelong benefits that education brings. Inclusion is at the heart of our vision, not just because including refugees through national education systems is right, but also it's smart, and because school is the safest place for them to be, especially girls. And no one can learn if they do not feel safe. This also builds bonds between refugees and host communities, fostering social cohesion and reducing conflict. Of course, it is very challenging, and that is why each of us must step up to play our role, host country governments, donors, working together as equal partners, holding each other accountable. This spirit is central to the new Inclusion Support Programme for Refugee Education, or INSPIRE. Led by the World Bank, it will unlock the financing and technical assistance they need to move forward towards full education inclusion. And the UK is proud to support INSPIRE, and we call on other donors to do the same. Let me end by just saying this. The way to change the world is to educate girls. We all understand why that is so important. It is partnership and perseverance which we need now, working together to ensure that our pledges today support refugees' futures tomorrow. There are plenty of words around. Now we need to see real action. Thank you very much indeed, and a happy Christmas to you all.
Thank you very much, Minister. And thank you very much for highlighting how the education can impact the life of refugees, especially for young girls. And I'm happy to see Hala here in the room. And also, I'm so happy to be here because I am one of the Commonwealth Scholarship and the Foreign Commonwealth and Commonwealth and Development Office with Window Trust International and Bangor University. Thank you very much for your support towards us refugees. Moving forward, in 2016, refugees figured only marginally in negotiations on the wording of SDG 4. We know all that SDG 4 is quality education. In 2022, hopefully, their needs were included in a transforming education spotlight session on education in situation of crisis. Ms. Stefania Giannini, what must happen so that refugees' education needs and all the needs of learners in situation of crisis are reflexively included in all member states' education discussion in all SDG 4 outcomes? Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. Yes, indeed, Bella, I think that it's been a long way since 2016. I'm thinking of the first Global Refugee Forum here 4 years ago. I had the pleasure, the honor to share UNESCO's pledge on education. I'm thinking more recently on the Transforming Education Summit in New York, where education in emergencies, including refugees, education for refugees was an important common priority. I see many partners here sitting, and we are very much keen to develop UNHR, ECW, GPE, and others. Well, let's go straight to your question. As I see anxiously, I'm looking for the warning for the time. Well, what do we need? We need to make the inclusion of refugees in education systems a structural component and not an ad hoc case-by-case solution. And this requires at least 3 key elements. Number one, the first is about national policies. We see a very positive trend on this side. A new UNESCO study found that 75% of top hosting governments include access to education for refugees in their policies. And this includes Jordan. We listened to the powerful message from His Majesty, and now the minister today includes Colombia, Chad, and other top hosting countries. However, is it enough? It's not enough. We need financial support, dedicated funds to support this action. And this is the second critical element, and we are not so good on this. We must be very honest and very clear, given that 85% of refugees reside in developing countries. We must share the burden, and sharing the burden is vital to make these policies go ahead and to be stabilized. And this is the critical role of partnerships, once again. And of course, financing, while crucial, is still not sufficient. We need a third step, and this is about the planning, sector planning in education. Inclusion requires detailed and multi-year planning. And we see very great examples going on. Let me mention Kenya, Uganda, Ethiopia. In Mauritania, UNESCO, for instance, is very much engaged, supporting some almost 80,000 refugee students, Malian refugees, structurally, once again, including in courses. And we are supporting the governments about resource calculation for additional teachers, because when you have a need for refugees, you need additional teachers, well prepared in mother tongues, and so on. Well, with these 3 key elements in mind, let me conclude with share a reflection from the UNESCO perspective, why we are here, why we are so many in this room, why it's so important to pledge on education for refugees. The answer is very simple, because education is a human right. It's a fundamental human right. And we cannot be serious to achieve SDG 4, and we cannot be serious to achieve SDG 4, to achieve the other SDGs, leaving behind the 35 million refugees who are now yet out of the system. And I think that this is our pledge from UNESCO to continuing with all our partners to ensure that inclusion of refugees is a structural component in national policies, and this includes many different dimensions that are so important, including also recognition of qualifications across the borders to make education a human right for all. And as you know, at UNESCO, all means all. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Stefania, for emphasizing on the education as a fundamental human right. And whenever we are talking about education, I hear about those great teachers that have made us to be here today. They have transferred their skills to us so that we can be important person in this world. And especially without forgetting for those teachers that are working in the challenging circumstances, especially refugee teachers, who knows that 50% or more refugees learners won't complete their formal education. Ms. Nyanen Malik, refugee youth activist and former teacher, what kept you showing up in the classroom day after day? Over to you.
Thank you so much for the great question. I'm Nyanen Malik Juj, a young refugee teacher in Kakuma refugee camp. As we all know that it's hard to be a teacher all over the world. But what is more harder, it's to be a teacher in the refugee context. This is because as a refugee teacher, you teach knowing that you are not qualified, you are not trained, you have less skill, and with the limited resources that all the refugee students must be in class and they need quality education. This is not easy. It requires a lot of commitment. It requires time. It requires also good heart to make sure that quality and good education is delivered to refugee students. Being a refugee teacher or teaching in a class of more than 100 students with the limited resources, knowing that every student needs a quality education, it's very hard. And them coming from different backgrounds, different nationalities, different religions, make it more harder for the refugee teachers and the learners, knowing that managing that class is not easy. As you say that more than 50% refugee learners don't always make it to complete their formal education. This is because of many challenges that they are facing at the personal level, be it social, be it economic, and be it physical. And as a teacher, it's my responsibility to make sure that they break these barriers, all the refugee learners, and to help them do better in their studies. As teachers, we don't teach. It's not because it's our calling, and we don't also teach because of the payment that we do get. We teach because we want to give back to the community. We want to break the mindset. We want to remove that perspective of knowing that maybe refugees don't make it. That is the one-sided story of refugees. That is the stereotype story of refugees. Personally, I was teaching to give back to the community. And giving back to the community in my perspective meant that I was once given and I need to give back to the community so that each and every refugee student or if each and every refugee child can get access to quality education. What keeps me going back to class every day are only three key things. Provide equal support to all the refugee students. This is because I believe in myself and I believe in a fellow refugee. This is also to support refugee students from discrimination. That is, it might be from the hosting community that we don't get equal access to the resources that are giving out, or we don't get equal chances. But as a refugee and someone who went through the same education, it's also better to remove that discrimination from all the perspective. Also, I do teach or I do go back to class because I want to empower the youth to discover their talents. I do believe that refugees are talented and they can make it better in life. As we all know that education for refugees is important because when we educate youth or refugee child, we know that we are transforming the world and we are making the world a better place for all of us. Teachers do build hope in students, especially in the refugee student. And that is the only thing that we cannot take away from any refugee child in the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Nyanen Malek, for your tremendous work in giving back to the community. Ms. Meni Kedwela, you will soon be taking up the post of Assistant High Commissioner. Congratulations. There are so many education experts here in the room, and we know that UNHCR as the expert in refugee protection, as an expert in refugee protection. What role does UNHCR play in delivering on the pledge you are discussing right now?
Thank you, Bella. I will be brief, and not least because I am facing a whole audience of experts, and I do not want my colleague at the back of the room flashing signs at me. Listen, I think everything that's really needed to be said has already been said, so that's really the beauty of following as the last panelist. Education empowers, connects, and protects. And I think, Bella, your presence and that of Nyanen here really demonstrates that amply. It's also something that covers the entire life cycle of a refugee situation, from the emergency, the initial emergency, all the way through protracted refugee situations, sometimes spanning several decades, and then hopefully to a solution as well, either in the country of asylum or back in the country of origin. Inclusion is a very long-term thing. Before, one of my previous jobs was to serve as a UNHCR representative in Pakistan. And in Pakistan, a significant part of the Pakistani school-age children do not have access to schooling. So you can imagine the reaction of the Pakistani authorities when UNHCR tells them you also need to absorb hundreds of thousands of Afghan refugee children in your national school systems. Any progress in that direction can only be incremental at best. So there's no magic bullet, there's no overnight quick fix solution to this problem. What UNHCR will be doing, and what it always does in this domain, and specifically in relation to this pledge, is essentially a role of coordination. We work with governments to plan in the planning, financing critically, and of course implementation of education programs for refugees, and certainly working towards inclusion in the national education systems. And we work with everybody. It's not just with the governments, not just with the ministries of foreign affairs or the line ministries, but also with regional actors, local actors, going all the way down to the grassroots, to the individual schools and to individual refugees as well. And the other thing that we do is, of course, work with other non-traditional sort of humanitarian actors like development entities as well. And Xavier was demonstrating very compellingly the role of the World Bank in the domain of refugee education. And what we do is to ensure that all of these different entities are brought together, and that certainly in relation to this pledge specifically, but also in relation to education for refugees in general, that all of this makes a cohesive whole. And the other thing, the second thing that we bring to the table, and certainly in relation to this pledge as well, is of course our own expertise in refugee education. It is a highly complex subject, as you can imagine, and carries with it, and Yanin has also already pointed out some of the practical difficulties of providing education to refugee children, the language, the discrimination, the challenges of capacity, etc. And that again is something that we do bring expertise in. We are present in 153 locations. We have been in existence for over 70 plus years. And there's not a lot that we have not seen in refugee education that we cannot address now. So essentially, those are the things we bring to the table. And just also to say, of course, in short, we are here to ensure that this pledge is implemented from A to Z. We will be accompanying all of you from beginning to end in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you again, Ms. Mani Kedwela, for highlighting the role that UNHCR is playing in the education pledge. And again, congratulations. A huge thanks to all the speakers for their critical comments, and thank you for all everyone that have come here to listen for these critical comments. As we are leaving the stage, we will now show a short film from the Sesame workshop, while the next panel takes the stage. Thank you again.
أنا صار لي تقريبا من وقت من 2012 جينا من بيت بسوريا تدمر يعني، وجينا من الحرب وجينا لهون ب 2012 وعايش بنفس الخيمة تقريبا. عندي 4 أولاد، شيء مأساة عشناها احنا ما حبيت أتذكرها يعني بالأسف. إذا الولد من هلا بيشيل هم هيك معناته ما له مستقبل يعني.
كل شيء، يعني هي مرحلة مستقبل الطفل، هون هو الأساس. يعني مش بس إنه أنا بدي أجي وبدك تتعلم هول الأحرف والأرقام وخلص بنفل على البال.
إيه صار لهم سنتين بيروحوا على مركز أهل السمسم يعني. في أنا ابني هذا وطن يمكن قلت لك كان نفسيته تعبانة كتير يعني، كان مرات صيرة نفسية ما بعرف فزع وما فزع ولا شيء. عم يرتاح نفسيا يعني قلت لك من هالشيء يعني لانه بيجي بيروح لهنيك لبرا بيرتاح اكثر يجي بيروح على المركز تبعنا.
يعني الدعم النفسي كتير مهم بهذه المرحلة. عم نحاول دايما نوفر بيئة آمنة لإله. هذا البرنامج هو موجود بحياتهم دايما، متكامل بين المدرسة وبين البيت.
بلادي أهم شيء إنه أول شيء العلم. يعني أنا عشت بظروف صعبة يعني. أدور إنه حياة أفضل يعني.
Thank you all so much, and thank you to the last panel. I think we heard from them that including refugees into national systems is the most sustainable and scalable approach to access to quality education for all. The education mega pledge that we've come here today to sign up to recognises the need for every partner to play their role and ensure responsibility sharing as enshrined in the Global Compact on refugees. But inclusion takes resources, it takes integration into planning, budgeting, monitoring at national level and right across multiple systems. And this means planning for inclusion from the start of an emergency response as well, aligning funding and approaches to support transitions and inclusion and ensure that host communities and governments benefit. I want to turn first of all to His Excellency Abdussalam Ould Mohamed Saleh, Minister of Education and Social Development. Mauritania has recently finalised a 10-year education plan that includes refugee learners. 10 years ago, it would have been almost unimaginable to think of this kind of leadership on refugee education and the incredible changes and transitions that you've committed to across your government. What opportunities does inclusion of refugee learners present in Mauritania, Your Excellency?
Thank you very much. Let me maybe start by a few general remarks. First, our knowledge of the refugees problematic has considerably increased over the last few years, thanks to the UN system, to the World Bank, and to others that helped us understand better this problematic and the challenges. Maybe in the 80s, we thought that refugees would just come and then go back. And there was not much to do except helping them maybe quickly survive. But today we know that refugee crisis takes on average 25 years to be solved. This is the situation. So if you have refugees, then you need to plan for the long term. The first camp in Mauritania was opened in 1992 with just a little below 20,000 people. Today we are 1,000, there are 1,000 and almost 142,000 refugees. And yes, all points to directions that this may increase further. The second is education is a human right. The speaker said that just a few minutes ago. But I would say it's the most fundamental of all human rights because it enables people to understand their other human rights as well and how they are going to battle to get their other human rights. If you are not educated, there is little chance that you understand what are actually your rights in a very complex society you are living in. And you are losing considerable opportunities, especially in our world today with all the social networks. It gives communication that gives new opportunities. So in that context, Mauritania has an open policy towards refugees. We believe that we need to help refugees integrate in the society. We need to help them get almost all the rights that our own citizens have. But we, of course, know this has huge costs, and this is why we need solidarity and solidarity with for every one who can help, in particular developed countries, donors, UN, UNHCR, and others. We have started since already a few years ago trying to help refugees integrate our own education system. And today we have an enrollment rate of 38%, which is low indeed. But it's happening in a region where all the refugees are, which is itself one of the poorest regions in Mauritania, and also a region very fragile, exposed to climate change and drought. And currently it has faced in this season a significant drop in the rains, and this is affecting the host communities. And this is the second most important maybe remark I would say, because we are talking about long term, because we are talking about inclusiveness, integration, we can't make a differentiation between refugees and the host community. If we are helping refugees and we need them to be lasting in the country and to be living in the dignity in the country before going back eventually home, also in dignity, we need also to support strongly and protect the host community so that we can have a peaceful cohabitation and an harmonious cohabitation. In our current plan, we have indeed pledged to reach 100% of enrollment rate. Luckily, the 38% is the same for the boys and the girls. That at least is a good thing. Because we know how important education for girls is, how it's important not only for Mauritania, but for refugees, but also for Mauritania, because education of girls is the engine actually for the progress, overall progress of the society, because only through this way you change the behavior. When you change the behavior of the girls, for example, regarding early marriage, regarding other access to health, you change the whole of the society. This has considerable dynamics, especially if you know that in the Sahel countries, Mauritania and others, you have demographic rates of close to 2.7 to 2.9%, which is actually making it almost impossible to see any improvement in the, any significant improvement long-term in the living condition of the population, because economic growth is on the range of 5%. So in this plan, we are pledged, and this is our pledge actually for this current forum, to reach 100% for all the refugees, children. Our engagement is also to provide quality education and training and professional training as well, to open also access to the refugees to employment and all form employment, including in our own market. And this will only be possible if the refugees are fully integrated in the national statistical system of the country. And this is a pledge also we are doing at this forum. To achieve this, it will cost between now and 2034 something like $200 million. I am happy to hear what just Mr. Xavier de Victor from the World Bank has said, and we are counting very much on this collaboration with the World Bank, very effective, and others to be able to mobilize this level of resources. And I will stop here. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. I think you've spoken about some of the complexities needed in terms of moving and that transition into inclusion. So thank you so much for that. Thinking about that transition, we're going to turn to UNICEF as one of the largest actors in both humanitarian and development education spaces, with established and distinct roles and funding streams for both. Mr. Choban is the Deputy Executive Director for UNICEF. Can you tell us a bit about what you've learnt needs to change in the way multilaterals understand and respond to refugee education with that thought process of emergency through to development and longer term?
Thank you, and thanks for having us here. And let me first say how much we appreciate everyone coming together around education, which is so critical. We all agree that education matters, that every child has a right to education, regardless of where they come from, who they are, whether they're displaced, whether their gender is, they're disabled. They should all have a right to education. It's not just the right thing to do morally, but it's the right thing to do from a common sense perspective in terms of return on investment, in terms of what makes economic sense. And yet, despite all of our efforts, and especially the efforts of countries that host refugees, 2 in 3 children that are refugees are not in school today. So we need to see this pledge as being transformative and as being a major shift. And what is that shift? That shift is to go from mostly humanitarian programs that work on parallel systems to really seeing how we can invest in the mainstream national education systems that can become inclusive of refugee children. And it's not an either or proposition, it's an and proposition, but with a lot more emphasis on the latter. That's going to take political commitment, as we've heard from the minister from Mauritania, and it's going to take all of us working differently. And as UNICEF, I want to say that we're committed to this. We're committed to working with partners like UNESCO, UNHCR, the World Bank, Lego Foundation, all of the different partners in the room to make this difference. We're committed to supporting national education systems, to adapting learning programs so that they reflect the needs of refugee and displaced children. I'm thinking, for example, of the Achilles language learning program, which teaches different languages to refugee children so that wherever they are, they can adapt into the national education system. We're committed also to addressing some of the barriers that prevent refugee children from accessing education, such as, for example, cash programs that provide support to families so that children can stay in school. An example of that is 800,000 refugee and host community children in Turkey that have been able to continue their education. We're committed also to providing support and training to teachers so that they can address and understand the specific needs of refugee children. And we're also committed to making sure that national education system are inclusive. I think one of the best examples of that is the work that I think we've collectively supported in Lebanon, where by sustaining the national education system, the public education system, we've been able to make sure that a 250,000 Syrian children have access to education, but also that 300,000 Lebanese children can continue to benefit from a system in a country where most children go to school in private institutions, but where the poorest are in the public sector. So by supporting the Lebanese education system, you're not just supporting Syrian refugee children, you're also supporting the most vulnerable of the Lebanese. So that's our pledge as UNICEF, to work with you to make sure that this pledge is transformational, that it represents the shift that we all want to see so that more refugee children are learning and fulfilling their full potential. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. And I think you spoke there to some of the types of partnerships as well that are needed to make these things a reality. And so it's with pleasure that I turn to Paul Frizzoli, who is the acting team lead of Lego Foundation's humanitarian portfolio. I think we recognize that partnership is key to making the ambition of the mega pledge a reality, and not just partnership, but really meaningful, brokered, new types of partnership with multiple actors. Can you tell us about how Lego Foundation and partners have worked together really tangibly to think about some of these critical goals?
Yes, thank you very much, Becky, and thank you all for having us today. In 2019, we pledged $100 million for an East Africa project called Play Matters to support about 800,000 refugee and host community children with learning through play. And now we're seeing the fruits of that labor with the Play Matters team having very dynamic partnerships with ministries of education, for example, in Uganda, to ensure that refugee learners benefit from national system programming and support. In 2023 and beyond, the LEGO Foundation will continue to support refugee children's inclusion into national education systems with learning through play so that they can thrive and develop to their full potential. The LEGO Foundation contributes 4 financial pledges in alignment with the Education Inclusion Mega Pledge. These pledges total $50 million US, and they will be within the early childhood development, psychosocial support, and social emotional learning and education sectors in Ethiopia, Jordan, Kenya, Lebanon, and Uganda. But for these types of pledges to be successful, it's crucial to find new ways of working towards more longer-term solutions so that all children have inclusive, sustainable, quality education. We encourage innovative funding, greater collaboration, and synergies between the public and private funders, including government donors and ministries. We believe that when the public and private sectors join forces, we can have a much larger impact on children's holistic outcomes and well-being. 2 of our pledges leverage these types of creative partnerships and additional funding for refugee education. The first is the Alliance for Inclusive Refugee Response, which includes the Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Novo Nordisk, Grundfos, and the LEGO Foundation, where we support a multi-sectoral refugee inclusion program in Kenya in alignment with the Sharika Plan and in collaboration with the government of Kenya. The second supports Ethiopia's effort to strengthen inclusion of refugees into national systems, while also strengthening the holistic learning outcomes and resilience of internally displaced and host community children. Together with the Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Grundfos, and the LEGO Foundations, and UNICEF, we will work closely with the government of Ethiopia. The LEGO Foundation and partners, we will continue to explore these types of partnerships where we can nurture and expand on inclusive, creative partnerships, which would include working with great partners like Education Cannot Wait for refugee education inclusion. And thank you very much again for this opportunity.
Brilliant, thank you. And thank you to LEGO Foundation, amongst others, for being real leaders also of the task teams in the GRF Education Alliance. Yesterday, we had an education campus with that alliance with almost 500 people, and thanks to everyone who came to that as well. But one of the commitments made in that was to minimize the amount of time that refugee girls and boys spent out of school at the onset of a crisis. Yasmin Sharif is the executive director of ECW, ECW being the global fund for education in emergencies and protracted crises. How do you and your organization go about trying to minimize that amount of time that children spend out of education and specifically support their transition into national systems?
Thank you very much, Becky. It will be my pleasure to outline that. I would like to first thank you and all of you in HR and the High Commissioner for Refugees and all partners in this room and in this summit. It's the second time we attend Education Cannot Wait. We were still young, now we are growing old. We have grown as a global fund. That's what I meant. So, so it's with a pleasure to be here today and to be able to give a very concrete pledge, which I will do at the end of this, okay? But first of all, there are some of you who don't know what is Education Cannot Wait, and as Becky said, how do you do it? And we do it with speed, but never compromise quality. So it's about speed, quality, and quickly get refugees and other crisis affected into the public education system. How do we do it differently else? Well, we are fun. I have my colleagues from the Global Partnership for Education, and we are funds. The implementers are our great partners on the ground. UNHCR, of course, is a major implementer with their implementing partners when it comes to refugees. UNICEF is another one, UNESCO, World Food Program, Save the Children, so many NGOs and local civil society. So this is an experiment in how do we actually work together, joint programming, and that is part of the UN Secretary General's reform. So I speak on behalf of a different model. Now, we have two different windows, and that is how we deal with refugee crisis in terms of investment. And I will give you very clear examples of that. Most recently, we had the armed conflict in Sudan that has been going on for a long time and now reached a whole new magnitude and depth and scale of danger and really causing mass flight out of Sudan and Darfur. And as a pooled funding mechanism, and here I want to thank Germany, who is a great, actually #1 partner. We have the United Kingdom, the United States, Denmark, Norway, the Lego Foundation, Canada, Qatar, Finland, and so many more for being part of this. We were able, within the first 2-3 weeks of refugees fleeing to 5 different neighboring countries from Sudan, to go out together with UNHCR to the border of Chad, to the border areas in Central African Republic and to Ethiopia, to quickly mobilize a first emergency response that would take them through the first months. And this is very important because their education cannot wait, and especially when you have fled such atrocities as these Sudanese children had done. And so that's one way, it's the first emergency response as soon as there is a refugee crisis. I even traveled with your High Commissioner to the Northern Democratic Republic of Congo when you had the big influx coming from Central African Republic. And what was really significant there is that those refugee children had never put their foot in a school in their life before. So we were there literally seeing them cross the border. Meanwhile, UNHCR and partners were building and getting ready and mobilizing. So that's how we do it. However, that's not sustainable. In the long run, you need sustainability and integration into the public system. And there we work very closely with host governments and all our UN partners. It's coordinated by UNHCR. We have refugee situations to ensure that by supporting the host communities with our investments, it becomes easier for the government to absorb, because usually these governments don't have, you could see the difference between the global south and the global north in terms of receiving refugees. For them to be able to absorb them into the system, they also need the financing and that kind of support. So in Uganda, we have a big, for the first ever refugee response plan that we developed, enabling the Ugandan government to absorb them into the national system. The same is happening in Colombia with the Venezuelan refugees, in Chad, in Pakistan, and so forth. And it's important that if we want to see every refugee child enter the public education system, where they get the diploma, where they get certification, that they can move on to tertiary education or go out in the workforce, they have to go to a public school system. You can only do non-formal education for the first 2-3 months maximum. So it's important, but it costs funding. And let me conclude by saying that in the OECD DAC countries, it costs about $11,000 a year for a student to go to school. Now, if you're going to integrate refugee children, you know what we have to move around with when we move around in all these refugee hosting countries in Africa? $150 per child. So we see the socioeconomic inequities. We can change that because I believe there's an abundance out there and we just have to be better at sharing. So in doing that, yes, but now comes the pledge. Thanks to our great strategic donor partners, I've only mentioned a few of them. There are 25 in total, public sector and private sector. Thanks to our amazing United Nations colleagues, thanks to all our civil society colleagues, and most of all to our host governments and to the refugees and the teachers, we are able to make a pledge that matches the fact that 1/3 of education cannot wait, pooled funding through joint programming, working together, 1/3 goes to refugees. If and provided that our strategic plan, and we are getting closer and closer, reach its targets of $1.5 billion, We reached quite high in February here. We are hereby pledging $500 million to refugees in the coming 4 years of our strategic plan. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the pledge. I think a number of the people in this room, we mentioned Germany, Canada, who are coming to in a second, Support Education Cannot Wait, and also Global Partnership for Education. One of the things that excites us about the mega pledge is having everybody in the same tent and trying to pull those funding streams and the approaches together so that we can really align that transition without any gaps. But as one of those key partners supporting it right across the piece, I'm pleased to come to you, Minister Miller, recognizing that Canada has been a really long-term leader, an advocate for, and a support for refugee education. As one of the leaders also of this mega pledge, how do you aim to advance the agenda?
Well, first, it's just really nice to be here. We're, of course, really proud to be the co-sponsor of the Mega Pledge today. I don't think anyone came here to hear Canada say that it believes that refugee children and youth have the right to be included in national education systems. This is obvious. But given the gaps that have been reiterated today that exist, that are a fact, it is important to state that right. And where it isn't possible, that there's a right to access quality learning and opportunities designed to bridge that gap. And that's in part what we're talking about today. It's clear that these education challenges, as you've heard from my panelists and the one before, are compounded by increasing conflicts, the corresponding displacement, specific and systemic targeting and threats to girls' and women's rights, as well as the magnifying effect that the climate crisis is having on us. These all have a tremendous impact on realizing SDG 4. But we know that education is a lot more than just a goal unto itself. It's about bridging the future of the next generation that will replace us and that we can't leave behind. It's one that leads us to solutions to the pressing crisis we face now and for that generation and the generation after that. It's why Canada is fully committed to advocating for gender transformative and inclusive education. It's why we're committed to working closely with ministries of education, with local partners, multilateral partners, local governments. For example, we're providing 10-year sovereign loan to Jordan focused on strengthening education, and we know the challenges that we heard earlier and that exist. We're also the key donor to supporting Rohingya refugees in partnership with Education Cannot Wait. And we're also committed to improving global education through evidence and data to identify successes and to help us reach those that may have been left behind. And we know that there are ones that are left behind. And finally, we're committed to amplifying the voices of refugees, including on international stages like this one. Canada's Together for Learning campaign has been instrumental in bringing refugees' voices to the forefront of these issues. We've benefited so much from the thoughtful guidance of the Refugee Education Council, a group of young leaders with lived experience in displacement from around the world. I'm thrilled to see Felix Sese, a member of the council, on today's panel. I had a chance to talk with earlier and hope to get to know a lot better. Ultimately, these are the people we do it for. These are the bright futures that we are talking about. And refugee education must be informed on a daily basis by these voices. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So a huge thank you to all the panelists. I think these have been really compelling, not just remarks, but tangible examples of strong partnerships, interventions, and approaches, as well as a call to action for everyone in this room. I am delighted now to invite Minister Schulz of Germany alongside Mr. Haramdar, who is a BMZ youth representative. They will come please to the podium and they will give closing remarks for this panel. And following that, there will be remarks from the floor. Thank you all.
colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, allies. When adults flee their countries, they put life as they know it on hold. Their children, however, often only know life as refugees. And while they are on this move, they still need to learn, to explore, to grow, to prepare for life. And preparing for life cannot put on hold. Refugee children have to go to school. They deserve to go to school. They need access to safe, high quality, relevant education opportunities. The most efficient way to achieve this is to include children in national education systems. The examples we just heard here illustrate this. And integrating refugee children and youth into national education systems allows them to obtain recognized qualifications and give them professional prospects. It enables them to lay the foundation for self-determined life, to make a positive contribution to their host communities, or to build future in their countries of origin. It is our joint responsibility as an international community to ensure that all children and youth can realize their right to education, no matter whether they are from a refugee background or from host communities, no matter where they are in the world. Whether they live in the Satari camp, like the children from Howeida Al Yaqub, who I met last month during my visit to Jordan, whether they come from Venezuela and now live in Colombia, or whether they live in Germany, where we are currently facing the challenge of how successfully integrate newcomers into our school system. The Global Compact on Refugees calls on us to share responsibility as host countries, countries of origin, and donor countries. Germany is living up to this responsibility by investing in high quality, inclusive education for refugees and host communities. We stand alongside host countries and as strong partners. We stand up for the right of education across all levels and in all forms, with a particular focus on girls and young women. We urge you to join us in this pledge, and I call on host countries to enable inclusion in their national education system through reforms, and I call on donor countries and multilateral partners to align their funding and programs with the inclusive approach set out in the pledge and to strengthen education in partner countries through long-term financial commitments. Today, we have the opportunity and the responsibility to enable better education for millions of refugee children and youth. This includes listening to children and young people and involving them effectively in our decisions. And which is why I want to share this window and hand over to Haram Dar. He is a member of our ministry's Youth Advisory Council and knows firsthand how access and education can change someone's life. Haram.
Thank you very much. Dear Excellencies, dear Minister Schulze, in time of multiple conflicts and wars, it seems like the access to education is a luxury good, a good reserved for the privilege of this world. But education is a human right, a right that is enshrined in the UN Rights Charter and UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, and is also goal number 4 of the SDGs. We can all agree in this room that young people and children are the least responsible for these conflicts, for these wars, and for the climate change. However, they are them who suffers the most of the effects of these terrible causes of flight. The girls in Afghanistan, the girls in Iran, the children in Yemen, the children in Ukraine, the children in Gaza, the children in Myanmar, in Sudan, and many other places in the world. There are many children who suffer in these conflicts for which they are not responsible. Many have lost their homes. Some had to watch their parents being killed. Some are starving, suffering, and seeing the misery of this world. The right to education is essential for these children. In particular, education gives the children hope and a bit of dignity again, which the adults of this world have robbed of them. It is important to mention that children and youth should be involved in finding solutions. In addition to the right of education, children have the right of participation, and of protection. Every child must be granted children's right. As a refugee child, I came to Germany from Pakistan in the kindergarten age. The world seemed to me as it didn't have much to offer. Growing up in a family with difficulties to access education, I had to fight my way through. It was only my access to high quality and equal education, my access to language, my access to the society that opened all the doors in the world for me. I can be a doctor, I can be a lawyer, or I can be a minister or a president. And I'm sure that every child in the world is capable for that. Every child is capable for that. We just need to do something to help. As a member of the BMZ Youth Advisory Council, I would like to emphasize again how important it is to involve children and the youth in decisions, especially in decisions which affect them. And we need to leave no child and no youth behind. That means to include young girls, to include people with disabilities and other marginalized groups. Their voice needs to be heard. Some of the people in the first row have a pen there, so you can just look. This is our original pen from my elementary school. Every second person, you as well. 10 years ago, Malala said, a child, a pen, and a teacher, and a book can change the world. Education is the key to empower young people around the world to become agents of change. What I'm calling for the global community is to finally stand up and provide that pen, to provide that book and provide that teacher. Just remember, a weapon can never be as strong like a pen, because a pen can change a world. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to encourage all the leaders and decision makers here today. Listen to children's and young people's voices and act on them for every child. Thank you very much. Oh, yeah.
Good morning. That's a hard act to follow. I know, I have a different pen, but completely agree. It was very inspiring. Thank you very much. Excellencies, I am privileged to have the opportunity to deliver this intervention on behalf of the GRF Education Alliance. We are a network of over 160 stakeholders, including hosting and donor states, civil society organizations, academic institutions, foundations, and refugee-led organizations, working to realize the vision for education set out in the Global Compact on Refugees. The Alliance has worked tirelessly to develop and promote pledges that ensure refugees of all ages have access to education opportunities. Across 7 thematic task teams, ranging from early childhood development to technical and vocational education and training, we have developed 7 ambitious multi-stakeholder thematic pledges. A strong focus on promoting the inclusion of refugee learners in national education systems run throughout these pledges. And collectively, these pledges will make an invaluable contribution towards the achievement of the Securing Sustainable Futures Pledge. Yesterday, the Education Alliance, in partnership with the UNHCR education sector, hosted a one-day conference. It was really inspiring to hear the actions that Alliance members are taking to support and promote the inclusion of refugees in national education systems. I'd like to finish by acknowledging the leadership of the Education Alliance and the co-chairs of its task teams. We look forward to continuing to work together to ensure that the Securing Sustainable Futures Pledge achieves its transformative potential. Thanks.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for giving your time. In September 2022, His Excellency Prime Minister Mr. Massoud Barzani has endorsed and launched the refugee education integration policy. The objective was to address the limitation of the parallel refugee education system and to ensure better inclusion opportunity for refugees in Kurdistan region of Iraq. Now, all children have equal access to quality education as refugee children follow the same curriculum as their Kurdish peers. This year, more than 50,000 Syrian children were able to enroll in 1,000 basic and secondary schools in Kurdistan, with a sharp increase in the enrollment rate. This policy is also groundbreaking as my government decided to hire 500 qualified refugee teachers to teach in public schools as contracted teachers, and also hire more than 1,200 refugee teachers as a lecturer. With the same income as other teachers, refugee teachers now teach both Syrian children and Kurdish children. We thus realized also their integration by providing them with means of subsistence. We put at good use their skills and offer them an opportunity to give back to our communities that have welcomed them. At this forum, we are pledging to expand the policy to cover all grades from 5 to 12 in the coming years. Not only is this the right way to go, but ultimately it's a cost-effective way to educate populations that live side by side. I would like to call upon other countries to follow our path. Education is a priority for all of us as a guarantee to build peaceful communities and give everyone to live dignified, refugees included. The international community must continue supporting our efforts and share responsibility with us for preparing future generations throughout education, common sustainable development goal. It not only takes a village to raise a child, but teachers, be they local community members of refugees. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It's an honor for me to speak here today in the name of the European Commission. The European Union commits to continue prioritizing education, including in emergencies and protracted crises, dedicated 10% of its humanitarian budget and at least 10% of its international partnerships development cooperation budget to support the education sector, with an objective of raising from 10% to 13% of development cooperation, and that will include supporting learning for all students, including those with refugee background. Erasmus Plus is the European Union flagship program for education, training, youth and sport, which continues to promote equal opportunities and inclusion across all its actions. The EU education investments in fragile countries and crisis-affected countries, which, as we know, are hosting most of the refugees worldwide. In those countries, the EU will commit 3.2 billion euros for the budget period 2021 to 2027. The EU commits to further deepen its partnership as a key donor to the Global Partnership for Education and Education Cannot Wait, to ensure refugee education and training actions are relevant, inclusive, equitable, effective, and sustainable. The EU is committed to contribute to the identification, elimination of all the barriers, supporting the refugee children and the access to education and the national education systems. We will work, for instance, to fund transnational projects with a budget of 6 million euro focusing on language learning to support the integration of migrant and refugee children in EU education systems. The EU also continues to actively partner with host countries to expand access to quality education, training, and improved learning outcomes in refugee hosting areas, and will increase its engagement with local stakeholders and refugee communities, empowering them to co-create and implement impactful education and training responses. I would also like to focus on teachers, and we have mentioned the importance of teachers this afternoon. And we will continue working and supporting teachers' training initiatives, as well as gender equality, which is our core strategy with the Gender Action Plan, whereby 85% of all our actions are promoting gender equality. Thank you very much for your attention.
In the name of Allah, the merciful, the compassionate. Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, it is a pleasure to present some points on education services provided by the Islamic Republic of Iran to the refugee and foreign displaced students for over 4 decades. In the last school year, a total of more than 700,000 refugee and displaced students were registered in Iranian schools, but cover this number required 3,500 new schools with 35,000 classrooms. The Iranian Minister of Education has been employed more than 41,000 new teachers to cover vacancy posts. To compensate this shortage in available national schools, we had to change a large number of schools into several shifts with non-standard overloaded students. This issue seriously lowered the quality, which resulted in local communities dissatisfaction. In this circumstance, international assistance to my country is less than 1% of the required expenses that covered by the Islamic Republic of Iran. Thus, regarding to the rocketing costs of education for all refugee and foreign displaced students, the international community, including UNHCR, are requested to provide us enough financial support in accordance with the principle of burden sharing. In Islamic Republic of Iran, education for girls is very important and is in high level, not only for citizens, but also for refugees. Thank you all.
Thou shalt not be a victim. Thou shalt not be a perpetrator. But above all, thou shalt not be a bystander. Bauer's famous words resonate louder than in recent history today. Starting with the victims, at Jacobs Foundation, we believe that education, especially quality education that is based in evidence, is one of the most powerful means we have to support the transition of refugees from the status of victims to fully integrated and contributing members of society. And that's why we're hereby pledging 50 million Swiss francs to work alongside the Colombian government in enforcing and furthering their excellent policy of welcoming refugees to their education system, but also to deliver on the promise of education to Afro-Colombians, to internally displaced populations, and to minority groups that have not enjoyed the benefits of it. To the perpetrators, history speaks very loudly and very clearly. Nobody who ever waged war against civil society, especially children, came out victorious. and to the fellows in this community, let our actions today be the answer to the question our children will ask us. What were we doing in these dark times? Let our actions not speak of bystanders, but of those who met their hope with opportunity. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm really pleased to be here today on behalf of the Global Partnership for Education. GPE mobilizes partnerships and investments to transform education systems in lower income countries, leaving no one behind. And leaving no one behind means leaving no refugee child behind. And this is why it's both natural and critical for GPE to be part of the Education Mega Pledge. GPE works with partner countries to strengthen education systems and make them more equitable, because this is the most sustainable way to ensure that every girl and every boy has access to a quality education. Many GPE countries host large refugee populations, but their education systems are severely constrained by shortages in teachers, classrooms, school materials, and other resources. So GPE's pledge is to support refugee education and host communities in 4 areas: providing and incentivizing financing for inclusive refugee education, promoting policy dialogue that includes refugee voices, mobilizing political will for inclusive education and financing, and supporting partner countries in sharing knowledge and evidence on the implementation of inclusive policies. This is our pledge, but I'm going to end with an additional announcement. Last week, GPE's board of directors met and decided to extend GPE financing to 2 new countries, Lebanon and Jordan, recognizing the demands and the efforts of these two countries are making to include refugees in their education systems. And this is timely and an important way for GPE to expand our support for the inclusion of refugees in education systems. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Yoab Tolina. I'm State Minister of Finance from Ethiopia. Ethiopia, as you know, has a long history of hosting refugees. Over the last 3 decades, if you look at the data, the numbers might have varied from few millions to hundreds of, millions to hundreds of millions, but we've been hosting refugees consistently. I know of fellow ministers, senior government officials from neighboring countries that were once refugees because they had access to education as refugees in Ethiopia. So Ethiopia has implemented a very progressive policy which gives refugees the right to access primary education at the same level and condition as nationals, extending to secondary and tertiary education as resources allow. Despite the complex socioeconomic challenge, the COVID-19 pandemic, and limited financial support, Ethiopia has made significant strides in this regard, in line with the 2017 Djibouti Declaration spearheaded by IGAD. Ethiopia has taken very important steps to harmonize refugee primary education and integrating refugee secondary and TVET education programs into the national education system, including inclusion of refugees into the National Education Sector Development Plan. But ladies and gentlemen, policy intentions notwithstanding, significant number of refugees children are now out of school because of lack of significant resources. In addition to this, existing school services and facilities are very much substandard. Even those that are getting access to education are not getting quality education. Sustainability of jobs and livelihood is also a big challenge, because programs that we implement, even with partners, are usually not self-sustaining, and they end at the end of a program period when financed by donors. So our pledge is to reaffirm Ethiopia's commitment to integrate refugee secondary education to the national system and to provide qualification and market-oriented skill development for 30,000 refugees and host communities through national TVT system with 70% of job opportunities by 2027. I thank you.
We had closing remarks already from Minister Schulz and from Haramdar, and just before we go to say, I hope you go with the words of Haramdar, Felix Sese, Belen Chirumwa, Nyanan Malik ringing in your ears, and remember that literally any of us could become a refugee, but not all of us get to be a global decision maker coming to an event like this. Let's see each other in 4 years to celebrate what we've achieved. Thank you.